Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible right here on Fulfill Radio. I am William Bell, and with me is our illustrious host, Dr. Don Preston. Don, how are you doing today? And what's going on out in Ardmore, Oklahoma, and the surrounding area? What's new?
Well, just a very, very busy time, very busy first part of the week here. As I was sharing with you before we came on the air, haven't felt good at all today. But hopefully I'll wake up refreshed and ready to go in the morning. You know, today was one of those days that the minute my eyes open, it's like, oh boy, this is not good. Don't feel good. I originally woke up at 3 o'clock, couldn't go back to sleep. And so anyway, that's kind of the way I've been going. I tried to take a nap this afternoon, and I mean, I just literally died for an hour and a half. Didn't feel a bit better when I woke up. So it's probably my allergies, which have been on an absolute tear lately. My wife was sharing with me that, pardon me, that according to the local report, the mountain cedars, which is what I'm most allergic to, they are on almost an all-time high for pollen output right now. So that's just wonderful news. But anyway, you know, there has been some exciting stuff going on. I've been corresponding for the last 3 days with some folks who have been dispensationalists, but have recently changed their mind about that. They have become really, really smitten by the unity, the beauty and the harmony of the full preterist view, and they've been corresponding with me and sharing with me a little bit of their journey. And you know, it's something that you and I have witnessed for, oh my goodness, for however many years and how many times, and yet it never gets old. It absolutely is a thrill every single time when you hear from somebody that is being set free from the dispensational world, or for that matter, from the amillennial and postmillennial paradigm, and they relate their journey to you about, well, they were once this, they were once that. They read Gary DeMar, or they read Kenneth Gentry, or whoever, and they saw the hermeneutic. They saw the consistency that the postmillennialists laid out, but they saw the inconsistency of their application of it. And so they began to feel uneasy with the postmillennial worldview, and then they discovered preterism, and they saw the consistency. They saw where certainly there are always questions with any paradigm. There is no view of doctrine. There is no view of theology of eschatology that has a 25-word or less explanation. There are always questions. And the minute you find an answer to that, there are 10 other questions that poke up their head. and what have you. And yet, in both your experience and mine, and in the experience of countless others now through the years, the fact that other questions are raised, they are not questions that strike at the very foundation of preterism. They are not. They're certainly not stonewall questions that would pose an insurmountable challenge to the doctrine. They're just simply questions about nuances, as I would call it. That, okay, if this is true, what does that mean over here? Well, those are interesting. They're important questions, and they need answers, to be sure. But again, they do not strike at the very question, is this doctrine true or not? They simply have to do with what I call, and I don't mean in any disparaging way whatsoever, but peripheral issues. And they have to do with, okay, what now issues? And those are not unimportant at all. Not unimportant at all. But they are not, is this doctrine true or not, questions. And so, like I said, I have been corresponding with 2 or 3 different individuals over the last couple of days who have been discovering and reading and researching. And, I was so thrilled. This was actually more than 3 days ago. And a minister who contacted me, he had been on my website. He had been watching the videos for almost 2 years. And, William, we have heard from countless numbers of people down through the years who said, well, the only reason I began paying attention at all to what you guys were saying is to prove you wrong. I would get my notebook, I'd get my Bible, and I was just there listening and watching and reading what you guys have to say, because I'm going to prove you wrong. And then a year or 2 later, they're full preterists. And like I said, we have witnessed that, oh my goodness gracious, the number of times. Well, that's a little bit like this minister that contacted me several days ago. He had originally set out to prove us wrong, and yet now he's completely convinced. And he ordered several tracts, and he goes, and so here's what I'm going to do. When I completely absorb what you have to say in these tracts, he said, I'm going to go on a tear. And he said, I'm going to order about 50 copies of each one. Pardon me. And he said, I'm going to pass them out to people and say, prove it wrong if you can. And he said, in my fellowship, he never told me exactly precisely his background, but he said, in my background, he said, one of our most prominent preachers has always called me the stick that stirs the pot. And he said, that's what I do. I love to get in people's face in a nice way, of course. But he said, I like to challenge people. And he said, I'll guarantee you what, I'm going to be challenging people on this. And I go, well, this ought to be fun. I suspect we're going to hear some more from this gentleman. So, like I said, I've been hearing from that type of individual over the last few days, and it really has been enjoyable.
Well, that's very good. It's good to always hear those kinds of stories and experiences that people have in their journey from wherever they are to wherever they should be, and that is, of course, with a view of fulfilled Bible prophecy. Speaking of that, and of course, I was just sharing with you today, ladies and gentlemen, if I don't have the normal energy that I usually have, it's because I was up early this morning before day, driving about 4 hours, and then on the way back about 6 hours because we got stuck in 2 hours of traffic right at the peak of the heat of the day, and crept along there just inch by inch because they were doing some road work. But anyway, we finally made it back, and we're grateful for that. But it has me beat, and we had to find a place to to grab something to eat because that took us off schedule for 2 hours for our lunch, and so we didn't get a chance to eat until late. But nevertheless, we're here. But speaking of prophecy, let me thank you for the brand new book that I received in the mail. On yesterday, which is titled In Millennialism, Redefining the Last Days by Michael Rogers. And I cracked it open last night, not at the beginning, but I think I started somewhere around maybe chapter 6 or 7 or whatever, before I went to the beginning. And I just happened to, start reading a little bit on his definition of the word erkomai and parousia. And I thought, wow, this is really some neat stuff. And then I read a little bit about his background, being an engineer, and his approach to the book from the perspective of, some of his engineering background and skills that he used it to put it together. So I take that this is going to be a good read. Excuse me. So far, I really enjoyed what he had to say on just those two terms, and they were kind of eye-opening. I know one he said he got from a student, and then he expanded on it, but I'd like to see, what he develops in that. So, and it's a nice book. I like it. The quality of it is good, and so I'm looking forward to reading that. Otherwise, we've had, quite a bit of interest. We've been doing a few studies on 1 Corinthians 15, just introductory studies, and just trying to get some people to see some of the basic things. And I've had, some people come back and say, already, and I haven't even gotten into the chapter. Thank you for helping me understand the resurrection. So at least we're making some headway there. And we've been touching on, a few of those difficult passages in some other classes as well. And so that's been proving good. So we're just trying to keep studying and keep rolling along. I think I've got a class coming up in India again, which I have to, I'm almost past the deadline. It starts on tomorrow, so I have to, do a lesson for them. But every class I've done so far, every lesson I've done, they've had a couple of people come forward to be baptized. So we hope that trend continues as we continue to work with them. And this is with Brother Adamala Hannock, who runs the preaching school there. So he's doing a great job with those men, developing them to preach, but also making sure they have a foundation in eschatology, something that I never thought would take place in terms of, the emphasis that he has. I always wanted to start a school, or at least be a part of someone else who started a school, in the sense that, I thought maybe I would get a chance to, be a faculty member or something like that, or teach and help to spread this through young men coming along. And then here comes a guy already with a neatly packaged preaching school with the syllabus and everything all together, organized. He happens to be in India, and he's training preachers at, 25 to 30 per year, along with doing some other teaching. And all we had to do was plug into that, which he already had going. And it's having some fruit. Dale Robinson has also been working with him a little bit too. And that has been fruitful on his part as well. So those are just a few things that are happening. And we are, we're grateful for that, and just, hope that things continue to move forward as people continue to be enlightened and, gain an understanding from the things that are being said, both here on this program. I've had a few people call me and ask, what time was this program coming on? So I know that there are a few more people who are tuning in to this study that, you're doing. And that's really, really exciting as well. I've been announcing it as well on the Sunday morning radio broadcast, so that people are aware that it's out there. So there you have it.
Yeah, very good. Well, that is exciting, absolutely exciting about being able to work with that School of Preaching in India. We have said very, very often that we may never know in our personal sphere of knowledge, we may never really honestly know of the impact that our individual ministries and our collective ministries is really having around the world. And yet, we both hear from people on a steady basis of people that have been watching our videos, that have been reading the material, totally unbeknownst to us, people totally outside of our realm of friends or acquaintances, even having never even heard the names. And yet they finally contact us and they tell us what a profound impact our respective ministries, and again, our collective ministries, has had on their lives. And that is just going to continue all throughout, not only our lifetime, as long as we are able to continue teaching. I mentioned last week that I was going to be able to go to a swap meet over the weekend, and I did, up in Shawnee, Oklahoma, which, of course, I spent 11 years there preaching at the East Main Church of Christ before I moved to Ardmore. And I made an awful lot of really, really good friends up there. I still have an awful lot of good friends up there, many of them in the car hobby. That's where I really began my car hobby involvement, buying and selling parts, buying and selling cars, and what have you. Very, very quickly, my wife and I didn't have any money. I mean, we were just barely getting by. I scraped up $20 to go to my very first swap meet. I had $20 in my pocket, and I told my wife, I said, I'm going to find some kind of a part that I can sell and make a few dollars. And it was like, are you sure you can do this? And I said, well, I'm sure going to try. I said, we've got to be able to make a little bit of extra money here. And that's how I started. I went to my very first swap meet at Chickasha, Oklahoma. I don't even know what part I bought now, but I bought a part, maybe two. I managed to sell those and, keep the money and make it grow. And I've been doing it ever since. So, but anyway, I just thoroughly enjoyed myself at Shawnee. And to get back to the point here about our ministries and preaching and continuing in our ministry as long as we can, there were several of my former acquaintances from up there, my friends, and one of them said, by the way, Don, are you retired from preaching? Do you preach anymore? And I said, well, due to COVID, I haven't been at a seminar now in a year. And I said, I don't have a regular pulpit job per se, so no, I'm not doing that. But I said, I'm still writing books. I've got 3 websites, and I just kind of went down the list of some of the things that I do. And they said, well, when are you going to retire? And I said, well, hopefully I'm going to retire when I'm up preaching somewhere, and I fall over dead. They seemed to get a bang out of that, and one of them spoke up and said, so you're just going to fall over dead and go home. I said, that's the whole point right there. And one of the guys standing there, I've only met him a time or two, and he goes, you know what, that sounded like a pretty good retirement plan to me. So, but I told him, I said, look, guys, I love what I'm doing. I love the message that I have. I love the ministry that I have. I love reaching out to people and helping people to understand God's word better. And I said, so, I don't have any desire to not do what I do now. And they said, well, you're one of the lucky few in this world that gets to do exactly what you want to do. So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting, and it was kind of humorous, about continuing our ministry until the very end. I did tell them, I said, I have told my wife, I'm going to keep preaching. I'm going to keep writing. And I said, I've told my wife, if I ever get up in a pulpit at a seminar, lectureship, or whatever, and I start rambling incoherently, I said, just come up and get me and say, it's okay, honey. It's just time to shut up. So anyway, we just keep on plugging, and we keep on studying, like you mentioned a moment ago. I've been involved in some fantastic research lately as I'm trying to get prepared for to go back to work on my Sabbath book. And of course, I'm finishing up on this book on circumcision and the new creation. And by the way, let me say this. If there's anyone in our audience that is well versed in word processing, I use Word Perfect. I don't need any snide remarks from William on this, okay? I know it's archaic, and William's way of thinking. I know I'm a dinosaur, and that's okay. But I absolutely detest Microsoft Word. So here's the deal. I have to convert WordPerfect into rich text format in order to be able to my printer, publisher. Well, I've never had a problem. Never, ever, ever had a problem. Just on this manuscript that I'm working on, every single time I try to convert it to rich text format, guess what happens? It converts every single one of my footnotes into endnotes, which means it completely messes up my pagination. And I cannot figure it out. And the first couple of times I did it, page 1 would be numbered as 7,532 or some weird, odd, strange number. Been able to overcome that, but I have not been able to figure out how to smoothly convert from my WordPerfect into rich text format without it converting my footnotes into endnotes. So, if there are any of you computer gurus out there, any of you folks that really understand word processing, if you can contact me and tell me how to do this, I will be profoundly thankful. And please don't send me an email saying, just forget WordPerfect, just go to Microsoft Word. It ain't happening. I think Microsoft Word is horribly difficult to use. I don't think it's intuitive. It's not user friendly. It's just pure frustration. So anyway, that's where Don Preston is, and that's the help that I personally need. So anyway, back to Ezekiel, unless you have some additional thoughts there, William.
No, none. I'm just trying to remain coherent at the moment.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are in what some consider to be the pinnacle chapter, the key chapter of Ezekiel 40 to 48, and that is chapter 47. We have spoken at length on this program of the difficulty of knowing and understanding whether or not the temple that is described is a literal temple that was to be built, and it's pretty easy to determine, no, there never was a literal physical temple built that matches correctly, fully, the description of the temple found in Ezekiel 40 to 48. So we know that from a historical perspective, all right? So the second question, therefore, becomes, and it is held by the dispensationalists, this is talking about the Messianic temple that will be established after the coming of the Lord, after the second coming of the Lord, at the end of the what they call the tribulation period. And like I said, folks, you're going to have to bear with me. You know, William is having trouble with it, with his cognition due to fatigue. I'm having trouble with my allergies. I had to use my respirator to even begin to think about getting on the program. I just simply haven't been able to talk all day long without coughing. So we ain't quite a team tonight. But I had to use my respirator twice in order to be able to get a voice that could even begin to communicate it in any way. So that dispensational view is that we must see Ezekiel 40 to 48 as a prophecy of the yet future millennial temple. Now, here's what's interesting. Just today, I've heard a couple of times from a fellow who is a dispensationalist, and he said one of the things that really, really bothered him, that really started getting him to look, to reconsider, was the fact that according to the Old Testament, or that is to say, according to the dispensational view of the Old Testament, animal sacrifices must be reinstituted. And in his words, this was always deeply troubling to me. And so, as I shared on this program before, I have studied with any number of dispensationalists down through the years who have shared with me that same kind of sentiment. That the very idea of the restoration of physical, bloody animal sacrifices it's really quite abhorrent. And that reality and that difficulty has caused an awful lot of dispensationalists to abandon that view. So, in one sense, the more they talk about it, and of course, as I shared with this individual today, he said they didn't like to talk about it. And I said, well, it's been my experience in dealing with dispensationalists that you're correct. They don't like to talk about it. They're deeply troubled by it, but they just simply trust their, quote, scholars, unquote, and their preachers to be telling them the truth. Now, that's not what we're supposed to do as believers. As believers, we are supposed to study the Scriptures for ourselves. We are supposed to be Bereans on our own. And listen, I know that we're living in a day and in a time in which deep, serious, in-depth Bible study seems to be becoming more and more of a rarity. As I said on one Facebook page just recently, when some opponents of covenant eschatology attacked me, and I was trying to explain things, and yet the explanation took a little bit of time, and they chided me. And then they chided me, well, you made over 350 videos on the Olivet Discourse, for crying out loud. And I said, yes, I have, and I haven't exhausted everything that I could say. But I said the tragedy here is that evidently you and an awful lot of people want your eschatology condensed to 25 words or less. And I said, that's not the way it works. Eschatology is a deep, comprehensive, in-depth study. And so when you demand that an explanation of the Olivet Discourse be made in just a really, really few videos, I said that betrays your own ignorance, your own inability to go into depth on what this marvelous Olivet Discourse really teaches, and the background to it, the prophetic background to it. And of course, they condemn me for saying that. So, with a certain group, as you well know, William, you're doomed if you do, you're doomed if you don't. No matter what you say, they're going to condemn you. They're just simply trying to be contrarians and argue for argument's sake. But nonetheless, the dispensationalists do posit the restoration of physical animal sacrifices, and this is problematic. So we have spent a good bit of time now discussing Ezekiel 40, went through chapter 46 and the difficulties that are there. I have shared with you how the Dead Sea community, the Essenes, were a group of people. In fact, I was reading another book today on this very thing. It's a very, very fascinating book. It was a doctoral thesis, as I understand it. It is the Jerusalem Temple and early Christianity, and it's really got some fascinating stuff in it. But he was talking about why were there three different temples, competing with the Jerusalem Temple in the early centuries. You have the Samaritan temple at Gerizim that was destroyed, if memory serves me correctly, in about the 4th century BC. You had a temple at Leontopolis, and you had what was known as the Elephantine Temple on an island in Egypt. And the question was raised, if the temple at Jerusalem was known as the temple, if the temple at Jerusalem was where God put his name, then how could Jews in any way, shape, form, or fashion establish other temples? Now, we can sort of kind of understand the mentality of the temple of the Samaritans at Gerizim that is mentioned in John chapter 4. Well, actually, the temple is not, but Jesus took note of the fact and discussing and talking with the Samaritan woman at the well. We can understand how Jesus said, "Woman, we Jews worship at Jerusalem, and we know what we worship, but you worship in this mountain," that's Gerizim, "and you worship you do not know what," in John chapter 4, 20 and following. Well, that the Samaritans established that temple on Mount Gerizim to be a direct competition to the temple at Jerusalem because they had rejected the entire Tanakh with the exception of the specific Torah. But then you have to ask the question, okay, what about the temple at Leontopolis, which was a very significant temple? Now, it didn't approach the Jerusalem temple by any means insofar as beauty and magnificence is concerned, but Jews established a temple at Leontopolis, and they likewise built another temple called the Elephantine Temple in Egypt. What caused the Jews to establish these two competing temples in these two different geographical regions? And the answer given when you read the literature is the temple at Gerizim was established because the Samaritans were rejected by the Jews. They were not accepted as true Jews, true Israelites. The temple at Leontopolis, the temple at Elephantine, was established because the Jews believed that the temple at Jerusalem had become completely and totally corrupt. And the priesthood was no longer descended properly from Levi, from Aaron and Levi. It was a bunch of criminals in reality, and they had no genealogical right to serve in the temple of God. They believed that the temple cultus had become so corrupted that God could not possibly dwell there. Now, that was true, again, of the temple of Leontopolis and the temple at Elephantine. Now, again, the temple at Elephantine down in Egypt had been destroyed at a very early time, so it was not a viable temple in the time of Jesus, but the temple at Leontopolis was still operating at that time. So I give all of this background here, folks, to help us to see that in addition to Gerizim, Leontopolis, and Elephantine, you had the oh gosh, you have the Essene community out there at the Dead Sea, and they likewise believed, just like the Samaritans, just like the Elephantine community, just like the Leontopolis folks, they believed that the Jerusalem temple had become so corrupt, the priesthood had become so corrupted, the entire cultus was illegitimate, that they believed a couple of different things. Proper worship could no longer be offered at Jerusalem. Therefore, an alternative cultus had to be established. Therefore, they saw themselves, and this takes us right back to Ezekiel, they considered themselves to be the spiritual fulfillment of Ezekiel 40 to 48. Now, I've shared with you that they believed themselves to be the spiritual fulfillment, although there evidently were some at Qumran who believed that although there was a spiritual fulfillment, that perhaps one day there would be a literal fulfillment. And so there were all of these different views concerning Ezekiel that were just swirling around, that served to make up the matrix of thought concerning Ezekiel 40 to 48. Now that's why I have expressed such uncertainty about some of these passages, and William has essentially agreed, as I understand it, that it is difficult, very, very difficult, for us to give any hard, fast, concrete exposition and exegesis of a great deal of the temporal teaching in Ezekiel 40 to 48. William, would you agree in principle with everything I've said here?
I do. I think you've established that, rather well with the problems that exist in trying to force it in either direction. There's definitely some glaring problems that have to be resolved.
Okay. With that in mind, we come this evening to what I mentioned at the very outset here, to what is generally considered to be the very pinnacle, the very epitome, and the crowning chapter in the entire discourse of Ezekiel 40 to 48, and that's chapter 47. And why do I say that? I say that because there is virtually no doubt whatsoever. The commentators are, it doesn't matter if it's amillennial, postmillennial, dispensational. Virtually every commentator that I have ever read agrees that the book of Revelation, in Revelation chapter 22, draws somewhat extensively on Ezekiel 47, at least insofar as two key tenets are concerned. Number one, a river of life flows in Jerusalem in Ezekiel 47. Number two, there is in this creation that is being described, there are trees whose fruit gives life and healing to all who eat of them. Now, we can summarize the chapter under those two tenets. Now, the language is really graphic. It's really interesting. It's very powerful. So here is Ezekiel, the Son of Man, after receiving what is to me the most confusing chapter in the entire discourse of Ezekiel 40 to 48, and that's chapter 46, because it talks about all these sacrifices and offerings and all of these gates and all of these porches, and there are four corners of this court, and at every corner of the court there's another court, and it's 40 cubits, and it's this, and I read that, and I've always said this. Pardon me. For some reason or other, architectural descriptions just blow me away. When I go to the book of Exodus, for instance, and when I read there the description of the construction of the tabernacle, and you got pillars and sockets, and you got this, and you got that. My eyes just kind of glaze over, and it's like, okay, whatever. And I have seen scale model reconstructions of the tabernacle that absolutely blew me away with their beauty. I have seen scale models of the Herodian temple. They are unbelievable. I mean, they're beautiful. And I kind of sit back and I go, well, okay. I'm amazed by anybody that can read those descriptions and make sense of them, because I don't understand that language. And so, like I said, we leave chapter 46, which to me is one of the most confusing chapters in the entire discussion, and we come to chapter 47, and all of a sudden I start going, aha, now then we're in an area that I can sort of kind of understand because of what John in Revelation says. So Ezekiel, the Son of Man, says, he brought me back to the door of the temple. There was water flowing from under the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the front of the temple faced east. The water was flowing from under the right side of the temple, south of the altar. Now, anyone familiar with any kind of a description of the Solomonic temple, the second temple of Haggai, Zechariah, Ezra, Nehemiah, etc., knows that the temple faced east. It faced toward the rising of the sun. There was all sorts of imagery. There was all sorts of symbolism associated with that. The sun bringing light, the sun shining and bringing light and life into the temple. All of these type of images that were constantly associated with that, a lot of times in the rabbinic literature and what have you. So now the temple is facing east, and Ezekiel says he came out of the temple and he watched as water began to flow out of the temple toward the east. Now, look, folks, you got to understand, the temple sat on a mountain. It was elevated. So when you're talking about water flowing out from the temple, you have to understand there was no river. Now, they had an, for lack of better terminology, they had an irrigation system, that brought water to the temple because, I tell you what, folks, the amount of water that it took to keep the Temple Mount, to keep the altar area clean was incredible. They had pools underneath the Temple Mount that were absolutely massive. I mean, we're talking much larger than Olympic-sized swimming pools. And that was so that they could take the water and bring it up to the Temple Mount, to the courthouse, to the courtyards, And, for instance, on the Passover, when so many thousands and thousands and thousands of sacrifices were offered, you can only imagine. You know, Josephus said that blood would actually flow ankle deep in the streets or in the main street of Jerusalem. Now, this is gory. I mean, this is awful. Can you imagine what it was like on the Temple Mount as thousands of priests are slaying all of these lambs and the blood is flowing? Well, just think about all of the water that is required. Cleanse the temple courtyard. So, again, that gives you some idea. Tremendous amounts of water were required. But again, folks, it's not a river. There is no river on the Temple Mountain. And so what Ezekiel is seeing is very clearly a miraculous thing with him and in the vision. Now, let's not forget, and this is something that we find so difficult sometimes, I think, to understand, because we in America, now it's not true in everywhere around the world. Some of the places that William went in Ghana, they have difficulty having good drinking water. That's correct, is it not, William?
Yes, that is correct. As a matter of fact, I was talking to both William in the Volta region and Solomon about boreholes for people who just, communities that don't have acceptable drinking water. That is, it's sad, it's a shame, but that's what's going on.
Yeah. So the point being that even though we here in America, I mean, we can walk into our bathrooms, we can walk into our kitchens, we can turn the handle. We've got wonderful, fresh, drinkable water. Although I must say, at this present time, our water source in Ardmore, our lake, is turning over, and it stinks to high heaven, and it tastes awful. I mean, it's just, but let me say that the greater part of time, we have good, clean drinking water. Jan and I have a refrigerator with water in the door, and it's filtered water. You walk over there, you put your cup under the spigot, you press on it, and you get really nice, beautiful, sparkling, clean water that tastes wonderful. Well, again, that's not the way it is all around the world. And I think one of the greatest things that we can do for some of these communities like William is talking about is to try to provide some funding so that they can have a well to provide water to drink with. I know that there are several ministries, broader Christian community, that's what they specialize in. Going into areas into India and all of these, really rural areas in Africa or wherever, and drilling wells for people where they have no water. Well, listen, folks, water is life. And we have to understand that in the ancient world of Israel, one of the symbols, one of the figures that was so important to manifest blessing, to communicate blessing, was water. In an absolutely fantastic prophecy of Isaiah chapter 30 and following, it actually starts in 29. But the context there is that the Assyrians have come up against Jerusalem. The leader of the Assyrians, his title was the Rabshakeh. Sennacherib was the king. And the Lord gave the citizens, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, he gave them a choice, and he gave them a challenge. Now, no military leader in the world would ever say, that's a great plan right there. The Lord told the inhabitants of Jerusalem, do not shoot an arrow, don't throw a spear, don't lift your shield, don't grab your sword. Trust in me, and I'll deliver this city. Now, look, you got hundreds of thousands of Assyrians gathered outside the walls. And again, what military mind would ever say, you know what, Lord, I think that's a fantastic idea. Everybody put up their swords. Everybody put up their bows and arrows. We're just going to sit back and do nothing. No. It took incredible faith for Hezekiah the king to tell the citizens of Jerusalem, do not fight. Now, I give that little bit of background there in order to take note of what the Lord said in chapter 30. The Lord promised that if the citizens and inhabitants of Jerusalem, if they would not fight, here's what he said. I will make streams of water. I will make rivers of water to break out, to burst forth on the top of every high hill. Now, that's just incredible, because water is extremely rare in Israel. There are not a whole lot of rivers. There are not a whole lot of streams. Now, archaeologists have discovered an incredible water network in Jerusalem to bring water from outside the city. Archaeologists, they've discovered Warren Shaft from the 19th century and all that kind of stuff like that. Well, the point being, this imagery of water, of bringing forth streams of water, rivers of water on the top of every high hill, every high mountain, speaks of a marvelous miracle of God. When Ezekiel says, I was taken out of the temple, and as I looked at the gate of the temple, at the door of the temple, there's a river flowing out of it. Now look, the temple was supposed to be a source of life. Okay? Unfortunately, down through the centuries, it had not been a source of life. It had been a source of corruption. And it was so in Jesus' day. But now Ezekiel sees a river of life. So, verse 2, he brought me out by the way of the north gate, led me around on the outside to the outer gateway that faces east, and there was water running out on the right side. And I'm assuming that's the right side of the door or the gate. Is that the way you understand that, William?
Whether it goes on either side of it?
Well, it says in verse 2, he brought me out by the way of the north gate, which there are gates on all sides. There were gates on all sides of the temple. And he led me around on the outside to the outer gateway that faces east. So we got the gate facing east, and he says there was water running out on the right side. And I'm assuming that now, instead of simply coming out from under the threshold of the temple, that it's running out of the threshold of the temple, coming out of the right side of the doorway. Is that the way you understand that?
Yeah. I mean, that's what he says on the right side. I may have Revelation 22 confused with that, but when you asked the question, I was sort of thinking about both of those. Let me go over there and look at it and just see. I want to know if I was even confusing those two together.
Yeah, I don't remember Revelation 22 saying the river of life flowed out from the right-hand side, but I may be.
It does. Yeah. That's the tree of life. Okay, that's the tree of life that's on either side. But anyway, yeah, go ahead. I see the point here. Mm-hmm.
Okay, then verse 3. Then when the man went out to the east with a line in his hand, he measured 1,000 cubits. And he brought me through the waters. The water came up to my ankles. Now, if I'm correct in this, and there's all sorts of discussion and debate down through the centuries as to exactly how long a cubit was, the general consensus is that a cubit is approximately 18 inches. So,
correct.
If it was 15 or 1,000 cubits, that would be 1,500 feet, 500 yards. So, measuring from the door of the temple, he measured 500 yards, if my measurements are correct. Is that about right as you understand it?
My brain's too tired to calculate, so I'm going to go with what you say.
Okay. Well, if we're going with my math, we're in a lot of trouble here, William. You know that. But I think that's about, as I thought about it today, I was thinking, 1,500 cubits, or 1,000 cubits, excuse me, that's about 1,500 feet, and so that would be, 500 yards. And then, verse 4, he measured 1,000 and brought me through the waters. The water came up to my knees. And he measured 1,000 and brought me through. The water came up to my waist. So now he has measured 3,000 cubits. About, so evidently about 4,500 feet. Right?
Right.
Okay.
That 1,500 yards,
and,
right?
Yeah.
If I'm following your math.
Yeah, well, again, yeah. Somebody check us up on this, okay? And again, And again, he measured 1,000. So now we have 5,000. 1, 2, 3, 4, or maybe that's, oh, no, that is the 5,000. 5,000, and it was a river that I could not cross, for the water was too deep, water in which one must swim, a river that could not be crossed. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he brought me and returned me to the bank of the river. When I returned there, along the bank of the river were very many trees on one side and the other. And so we have this five-fold measurement of 1,000 cubits, approximately 7,500 feet, give or take. That's Preston's measurement, Preston's calculation. Now, obviously, this gives the idea of growth, of a river swelling and growing as it goes. Now, that's possible. You know, we know that the Mississippi River starts in the extreme north of the United States, or is it Canada? Anyway, way up there north. And as it goes south, it grows and grows and grows. Not because the original stream grows, but because tributaries flow into it. Here, there are no such tributaries. Here, it is the river itself that is growing. And just like any Jew in ancient Israel, any Jew in the Middle East would understand this perfectly. Everywhere the river went, it brought life. Now, as a result of this, you see, we have scholars in virtual agreement that when John talks about the river of life flowing from the New Jerusalem, and of course, you see the little bit of the difference here, and yet this has not deterred the scholars from seeing the parallels and seeing that we're talking about the same thing, and from seeing that John is drawing from Ezekiel. In Ezekiel, the river flows from the temple, which of course is in Jerusalem. In Revelation, there is no temple. The river flows from the New Jerusalem. Now, I've got to tell you, this is a little bit of a digression. Today, but I've just got to make this hermeneutical point, and I make this point so very often, but it's so incredibly important. Today I was reading an article by Thomas Ice entitled The Last Trumpet. And he was saying that the last trumpet of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 52, is not the seventh trumpet of Revelation chapter 11, verse 15 and following. And the reason for it is because 1 Corinthians 15 is the rapture. Revelation chapter 11 doesn't mention the rapture. Well, neither does 1 Corinthians 15. But here's the point. Over and over and over again, this happens constantly in the attacks on covenant eschatology, in which people say, well, I don't see the words AD 70 in Acts chapter 17. I don't see the word Jerusalem. I don't see the word temple. I don't see this word or that word or whatever. And they think that that's a valid argument of some kind. But all in the world that means is that they are imposing an unrealistic journalistic concept and principle on the biblical writers. They're essentially saying that if the biblical writer didn't use the exact specific terminology that they think they ought to, or that was even used in other texts, hey, then any given text cannot be talking about a given subject. I mean, it's just really, honestly, a ludicrous hermeneutic. Well, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, we are absolutely out of time. It is time for William Bell to get some rest, time for me to eat some supper. I want to thank you for joining us here on Two Guys and a Bible, Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And with that, I'm going to say good night. God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Don Preston and myself, we'd like to say, have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.